As the Ukraine-Russia war completes an unfortunate milestone of 500 days, President Volodymyr Zelensky returned home from a visit to Turkey, and he brought with him 5 commanders of Ukraine's former garrison in Mariupol. The 5 commanders were living in Turkey under the terms of a prisoner exchange last year. Russia has hit out at Turkey, stating that this violated a prisoner exchange deal. This comes as Turkey has strongly supported Ukraine joining NATO, stating that there is no doubt that Ukraine deserves the membership.
Ukraine's presidential press service has released video showing President Volodymyr Zelensky returning home from Turkey with 5 former commanders of Ukraine's garrison in Mariupol. That's despite a prisoner exchange last year under which the men were meant to remain in Turkey. Russia immediately denounced the release of the men, with the Kremlin spokesperson saying Turkey had violated the terms of the exchange and hadn't informed Moscow. The commanders are hailed as heroes in Ukraine after leading last year's defense of the port, the biggest city Russia captured in its invasion. Thousands of civilians were killed inside Mariupol when Russian forces laid waste to the city during a 3-month siege. The defenders held out in tunnels and bunkers under the Azovstal steel plant until they were finally ordered by Kyiv to surrender in May last year. Russia freed some of them months later in a prisoner swap brokered by Turkey under terms that required the commanders to remain in Turkey until the end of the war. Zelensky gave no explanation for why the commanders were being allowed to return home now. Turkey did not immediately respond to a request for comment.
Glenn Diesen is a professor of international relations at University of Southeastern Norway. Glenn is joining us now live from Oslo. Glenn, welcome to the program, and it's good to see you.
Likewise.
Zelensky's tour of Europe ended with him returning with Mariupol commanders as part of a prisoner exchange with Turkey. Russia is not pleased with this latest move. What is the deal that Kremlin alleges was broken by Turkey?
Well, the agreement was broken was that of a prisoner exchange. That is, the Ukrainians wanted some of these Azov commanders from Mariupol, and this was very controversial in Russia, indeed. But it was not a popular decision by Putin to agree to this. And one of the ways this could be done was under the condition that they would remain in Turkey for the duration of the war. Now, the reason this was very unpopular is that these are leaders of Azov. This is the reason why the United States for years did not want to arm them, was because they're a Nazi group and Russia deems them to be a terrorist organization. So this is also the group that terrorized Donbass for 8 years. And given that Russia's official one of the reasons for invading Ukraine, or one of the objectives, is to denazify, handing over these guys was very controversial. But again, it became acceptable under the condition that they would stay in Turkey for the duration of the war. So now, from the Russian perspective, both Turkey and Ukraine has now broken the terms of the agreement.
Right. Glenn, it seems like 3 countries are now at loggerheads. We are talking about Turkey, Russia, and Ukraine. Will this latest action by Ankara and the country supporting Ukraine's NATO bid sour their relationship?
I think, yeah, definitely. I mean, Turkey would like to establish itself as an independent pole of power in a multipolar world. So they don't want to align themselves or marry themselves to one side, as that undermines their ability to form closer relation with the other side. So from Turkey's side, I think this is merely a rebalancing. Also, they are a NATO member, so it shouldn't come as that big of a surprise. But the objective then would be for Erdogan to avoid being too close to Russia and, well, rebalancing to some extent. Again, this is a different form of balancing or independent pole of power than you would, for example, see in India, because Turkey has a tendency to aggravate all sides to some extent, as opposed to take a very neutral position. So, but you see that this is coinciding with many other decisions by Turkey. For example, they argue now that Ukraine belongs in NATO, and at the same time they're breaking this agreement with Russia. So there's a lot of things happening, and of course it could be under pressure from the United States to do this as well, because this is not just a propaganda victory for the Ukrainians, but also one for NATO, which are now meeting in Vilnius. And also there's an objective, obviously, to humiliate Putin, as the NATO tends to, well, think that they see an opportunity to weaken the authority of the Russian president after the Wagner mutiny. So this is a way of making Putin look weak and also put some pressure on him, given that this prisoner exchange to begin with was very unpopular within Russia.
Glenn, finally, what happens next? What should we look out for in the coming months following these developments in Turkey?
Well, I think we're reaching a very dangerous point in the war. I mean, just recently now, the United States has said that they would send the cluster bombs, which is, well, they've called themselves a war crime to use. And the reason why they're doing this, they said very openly, this is because they have no more ammunition to send to Kyiv. And Ukraine is losing heavily on this offensive. And meanwhile, Russia is building up its strength in order to have its own offensive. So I think for NATO, NATO is at a bit of a dilemma. Either escalate dramatically with this new cluster bombs and, well, other forms of escalation, or sit and negotiate. They have to do either or, because I think Ukraine is about to break, and it looks like NATO prefers to escalate. So I think more long-range missiles, more illegal weapons, possibly sending more so-called volunteers, mercenaries from NATO countries. So there's many things that can be done, but I think the war is about to enter a very dangerous stage, given that NATO has no interest in sitting down and finding an agreement with Russia in which Russia gets some security guarantees from NATO.
Right. I've been talking to a professor of international relations at the University of Southeastern Norway, Glenn Diesen. Thank you very much for talking to We On Wild is One today.
My pleasure.
We On is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.